Ellis Ross. I am the MLA for Skeena riding, and we are at the viewpoint inside the heart of Kitimat BC. What you're looking back there is basically the LNG Canada dock that they'll be building for their facility, their export facility in Kitimat. And my heritage is born and raised in Kitimat village. I'm part of the Haisla band. My mom and dad are both Haisla and of Tsimshian descent. And I came onto council back in 2003, labored as a councillor for 8 years, became the chief councillor. And then when the timing was right, I resigned from that position to be an MLA so I could further along the agenda of LNG. I don't believe the idea that First Nations have to suffer in poverty. I don't believe the idea that we have to be victims for the rest of our lives. I don't blame the social issues that Aboriginals have on anybody. Both my parents went to residential school, but not once did they mention that as a reason why they shouldn't succeed in today's society. So when I take a step back and look at not only the problem, but the possible solutions, I don't believe in the Indian Act. I don't believe in the victimization. I don't believe in prolonging the misery of First Nations. I believe that one of the quickest ways to get First Nations out of their social problems and their poverty issues is to basically just give them a job, or give them an opportunity at a job, and show them that they can dictate their own future as an individual. And if you do that as an individual, you can uplift your entire people. The whole fight for the Aboriginals back in the 70s and the 80s was just the idea of being heard and being allowed to, at the decision-making tables with the government industry. That was the whole fight. So Aboriginals were only trying to get to that table so they could resolve their own issues on their own terms. And then the rights and title case law started to evolve at the same time. Well, along that time, because there was no real allies for the Aboriginals, the environmentalists on their own agenda actually teamed up with the Aboriginals. Now, unknown to a lot of Aboriginal leaders and a lot of Aboriginal communities, the environmentalists actually had their own cause. They had their own agendas, they had their own objectives that didn't actually line up with what the Aboriginals were trying to achieve. When the Aboriginals were just trying to find a way out of poverty, they weren't trying to destroy economic development, they weren't trying to destroy the jobs or the economy, they weren't trying to do that. And that's what the Aboriginals across BC and Canada are realizing now, that they got co-opted into somebody else's agenda, and that's what they're trying to reverse now. You know, there's a number of terms coming out now: red washing, eco-colonialism. Basically, Aboriginals were used for a certain agenda and ignored to a certain point. And being used in terms of when the first settlers came to Canada, being used to settle Canada. And then once they were used, Aboriginals were discarded. And I think that's what he's referring to now. The environmentalists are actually using Aboriginals to further their own ends, and then once they have no use for them, they discard them. And I think that's where the eco-colonialism term came about. Kitimat, the Haisla band, is very progressive. They elected very young leaders, they elected educated leaders, and the new leaders came up with new visions. And it all centered around getting people employed and not relying on government to resolve their poverty issues, their unemployment issues. Unfortunately, there's still bands across BC that still believe the next salesman that comes down the road, that kind of reverts them back to 30 years ago, that builds on the idea of rhetoric or the fear-mongering that Canada, for instance, is responsible for all the global warming, that fish farming is responsible for all the issues around wild salmon, for example. And if you don't have the capacity or you don't have the knowledge to actually understand the truth, then yeah, your band is going to get taken back in time, 20, 30, 40 years in time. But I think the new generation of leaders that are coming up now that are more independent thinking and more brave and courageous to actually forge a new future based on truth, not on fear-mongering or rhetoric, I think those bands are actually the future of Aboriginals. I've had so much more experience with oil and gas. And a number of those communities over there think more about the opportunities around oil and gas pipelines, facilities. They think more about the contracts. They think more about developing their own their companies to take advantage of the contracts. In BC, we're just getting started. I mean, very few Aboriginal communities on the northwest coast of BC have the companies capable of taking advantage of these opportunities. That's why you see so many joint venture entities popping up all over the place. So in terms of what we can learn, the Aboriginals of BC can learn from Alberta's Aboriginal communities. What were the pros and cons? What would you do different? And I think the Alberta Aboriginals can kind of get more insight into the environmental issues that BC faces, not just from the Aboriginal community, but from the non-Aboriginal community. And there's a happy medium there if we can actually find that middle ground. In the office, Terrace and Kitimat, I have an office at Terrace and Kitimat, and so what do the people think about my new role? I had a bit of a profile before I came into this job as MLA, and I advocated for LNG, I advocated for forestry, I basically advocated for anything that I thought balanced the environmental and economic needs of the region. So when I got elected, people were kind of skeptical about what my agenda was going to be. People thought I was going to just advance the Aboriginal agenda. People thought I was going to advance different issues other than what the writing wanted or needed. And now the response I'm getting in my office is that people are glad that I'm out there in Victoria, in the paper, fighting for Skeena, trying to put Skeena on the map, trying to get Ottawa to notice us. And basically all I'm doing is basically just trying to fight for the region, trying to fight for, because I want my kids to stay, raise a family, I want my grandkids to stay, raise a family. And I don't care if you're Aboriginal or not. Everybody wants that same opportunity. And that's what I get in my office. The grandparents, the parents come in and they're glad that I'm trying to fight for a future for their children. You know what, I see industry trying to balance the environmental issues, but really without industry there's no Kitimat. I mean, this town of Kitimat was built by Alcan, the aluminum smelter, and I don't see the environmentalists trying to balance out. I don't see environmentalists basically doing anything for what I stand for, and I stand for people. I don't want to see people end up in prison, on the streets, homeless. I don't want to see them leave Kitimat. I don't want to see them leave Terrace. I don't see the environmentalists trying to balance it. The only people I see trying to balance environmental with economic issues is industry and government. But we got one party that refuses to do that. And so that's basically why I think a lot of people understand that the balance is already there. In fact, 30 years ago we had a pulp and paper mill here. Kitimat's still here. 7 years ago we had aluminum smelter. It just got upgraded to one of the cleanest smelters in the world. We're still here. And it's not 30 years ago, it's not 7 years ago. Standards have been higher. Industry is doing so much better. In fact, Canada, I think, in terms of global warming, is the solution to global warming. We've got to teach Russia how to do this. China, United States, European Union. We're the example. It's not like 30 or 40 years ago where the standards were almost non-existent. It's a different day and age, and Canada's leading the way.